Really pleased to have a great lineup of speakers today to tell you a little bit about the broad range of research that we're involved with across the child, family and young people's stream. I think we were trying to think about what the common thread might be, and we were saying that it's probably the fact that all of the studies that we're going to hear about today involve taking mental health interventions perhaps outside of traditional NHS mental health settings. So into the third sector, into schools, and sort of collaborating with other organisations outside of the NHS. So yeah, as Bonnie mentioned, there are 4 presentations today. And yes, if you'd be happy to ask questions right at the end of the session, so we can have a little bit of an overarching discussion. But yeah, do feel free to put questions in the chat as you go along, either if you can't stay to the end, just if you've got a specific question, so that yeah, you don't forget it, I guess. Okay, so our first speakers, really delighted can join us today, are Dr. Daksha Trivedi and Kayte Rowe from the University of Hertfordshire. And they're going to tell us about the READY trial looking at physical activity for depression in young people. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for inviting us today. The READY trial is funded by the National Institute for Health Research, and indeed the NSFT is a strong collaborator on this research, so delighted to be here. So the READY trial is started, it's underway, and it's looking at physical activity for depression in young people. The first phase is the feasibility phase, and it's targets the 3 sites in the east of England, which is Norfolk, Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire. So today we're going to talk about the overview of the READY trial, but also touch on how the pandemic had impacted on the READY trial research and how we adapted some of our protocols and procedures and what challenges we encountered, and a little bit of an update on where we are at with the READY trial, having incurred substantial delays and again, the impact of the COVID. So, as I said, yes, it's a collaboration between the University of Hertfordshire, Norfolk and Suffolk NHS Foundation Trust, the Hearts Partnership Trust, the University of East Anglia, the Norwich Clinical Trials Unit, the University of Bedfordshire. So the team overall, all the collaborators teams is over 20 people who bring lots of different expertise, not just young people, young people and mental health, but all the methodological, and it's a clinical trial, so I'll come into that a bit later. And lots of not just methodology, design, subject expertise, and really a very strong collaborative team. So, and here is just an example of some of us at our during our COVID online meetings. Clearly, I'm sure you recognize your colleagues from the NSFT. And this is the research team at the University of Hertfordshire. It's a collaboration between the Life and Medical Sciences and the Health and Social Care. And I'm co-leading this trial with David Wellsted. So just a little bit about the READY trial and the background. Well, this was a commissioned call from the government on looking at young people's mental health and interventions that would help reduce depression. We know that there is a high prevalence of depression, up to 20%, and more girls are affected than boys. We also know that rates have continued to increase gradually over time. Certain groups of people do have higher rates of depression, such as the LGBT community and heterosexual young people. And again, that's something that we would like, the READY trial aims to address health inequalities with high prevalence in people from ethnically diverse groups. Over time, the referrals to the mental health services has been increasing. However, at 12 months, almost half remain clinically depressed. And we also know from the research around this subject that young people's mental health results in poor outcomes, not just for the young person, the families, and of course, a huge cost to the services. We also know that currently psychological therapy and antidepressant therapy are offered, but they don't always work in all the young people's populations. We also know that there are long waiting lists for this. Our studies and also evidence has identified that there are unmet support needs, and this puts children further at risk. There is research also that has suggested that young people who do seek help and benefit, who seek help from mental health services do benefit from mental health services. And we are working with the child and adolescent mental health services who offer a multidisciplinary input. We also know from even from our Ready trial and working with the local sites that there are many people who do not access services or they delay seeking help. But most importantly, there are a huge number of people who do not meet the threshold for the mental health services, and so they drop off the services. And we hope that the Ready trial will give them an alternative to help them with issues around depression. So it's a trial of physical activity, and research has suggested ways in which physical activity might help, just by being together in a group, having social interaction. Has an as impact on managing depression. Then there are physiological mechanisms that are suggested. When we exercise, we release endorphins and neurotransmitters. Then there is the anti-inflammatory strategy. When we exercise, we promote our immune systems, our anti-inflammatory response, and that may have an impact. But this call was commissioned because there is uncertainty about exercise intensity and benefit for depression. We know we feel good when we exercise, but we don't know whether high intensity or low intensity or levels of intensity help with depression in young people. So the aim of this research is to find out whether physical activity is an effective treatment for young people with depression, and whether the intensity level makes a difference, and whether it's good value for money for the NHS. So this is just it's a complex trial, but this is just an overview about how it works. So young people aged 13 to 17 years diagnosed with depression or having low mood are referred. They are screened for eligibility to be in this trial, and I'll come into the eligibility later. Those who are eligible, those who are living with an experience of depression, they are randomized to one of the three groups. So we have a high intensity exercise group, a low intensity exercise group, and a social control. And all three groups receive what we call a behavioral change education at the beginning, which is really about motivating them to exercise so that once they've completed this trial, they are able to sustain just engaging in exercise. And the exercise interventions are delivered by active sports partnerships at the three sites, with the mental health support worker to support the groups, and the exercises are delivered twice weekly for 12 weeks. We then collect data at 14 weeks and 26 weeks, and we collect data on a whole range of outcomes like depression, physical activity, the heart rate monitoring, also assessing resource use, also family burdens and the quality of life. But in this feasibility design, we've actually embedded a process evaluation and some qualitative methods, such as focus groups with young people and their families, because we really want to look at their experiences of taking part in this trial, their views, their how acceptable it is, and I'll come on to those specific questions in a minute. So the clinical trials unit in Norwich are responsible for randomizing and managing the data. We've engaged with the child and mental health services in the three sites. A very strong component of a design is PPI input and a stakeholder forum, together with steering committee, data monitoring committee, and young people's advisory group have been essential to this, where young people have provided input into different elements of the trial, such as reviewing documents, giving us advice about their views on preferences of exercises in the groups, and particularly during COVID, how might this work? And we've had a really good feedback. Our advisory steering committee has got young people's families, young people's parents, to people who are inputting into the trials. So you can clearly see is that reviewing and refining and what would work, what would be relevant to the young people is hugely informed by PPI input. So I mentioned inclusion criteria. So help-seeking young people who are aged 13 to 17 years who have reported mild to moderate symptoms are eligible for the trial. They can be in this trial and they can continue their treatment, any other treatment they're receiving for their depression. They need to consent to the participate with also consent from the parents and carers. And therefore we need parent, carer, or guardian are also taking part in this study. And there are very, very few exclusion criteria. Those who are really considered unsuitable by the clinician or they have any contraindications to engaging with the exercise. So what is actually involved in the intervention? So young people are taking part, and this is an older slide, so it says will take part, but they are taking part in 2 60-minute sessions per week for 12 weeks in one of these 3 groups. So the high intensity group is exercise that gets your heart rate up, example, boxing and high intensity interval training. And then there's a low intensity, low stroke, moderate intensity exercise, which keeps the heart rate at a steady pace. And we're measuring this during the session, such as stretching, yoga, and so on. And there is a social control group who do not have any exercise, but they have group activities such as quizzes, games, and escape rooms, and so on. But all groups are asked to complete questionnaires, and they also wear an accelerometer at the beginning and end of the program so we can measure their workout and their heart rates. I'm going to try and just play this very short video. I hope it does play. Okay. Let's see.
You may need to change your window screen, Daksha, because we can just see your slide. Sorry.
Sorry. So how do I come out of this?
If you go back to your share content button, go to your window and share the window that you're playing the video in. That should come through. Yeah.
So I go into. Do I stop sharing this?
You can do. Yeah, you can.
I would have to, I think. Okay.
And also make sure that you remember to share the computer sound so we get the audio.
Okay.
Right here, so let's see. Sorry about that. I didn't. Oh yes. Okay, here it is. Is that better?
No, we can see your slide again from before, not the YouTube window that you have it in.
Can you hear that?
No.
Sorry, could you hear that?
No, we can still see the slide that you had up before.
Okay.
So the window hasn't changed.
Want to play this, or somebody? Are you able to play this? Obviously, something wrong with my system. Then.
Yeah, I can share it for you, Daksha.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The READY trial is a research study looking at whether physical activity improves symptoms of depression in young people aged 13 to 17. Our 3 programs runs in Bedfordshire, Hertfordshire and Norfolk. Young people will be allocated randomly to one of 3 groups. High intensity exercise through vigorous activities, low intensity exercise-based activities. Over 12 weeks, young people will attend 2 group sessions a week.
We can't hear anything now.
I don't know.
involved in the programme, contact the Ready Study team by email.
Okay, I'll just go back to sharing the slides. Sorry, well, I don't know what happened there, but okay, so I'm going to pass it on to Claire now to look at. So I think that video was actually just giving an overview of what I'd said about how the trial will work, but happy to take questions later on. Over to you, Claire.
Okay, thanks, Daksha. So I'm going to take you now from a bit about the progress and how we've actually been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So we were due to open the sites at the end of March 2020. So we were literally ready to go when we got all research activities got put on hold on the 20th. That created a really long delay for us, because it wasn't just that we couldn't start the study. All processes, key processes stopped. So approvals through the ethics committee, NHS permissions had to stop, the training of staff and contracts being signed, because obviously everyone, you know, it had a knock-on effect. So it wasn't just our research that couldn't start, we couldn't actually go through the process, which delayed it more. Other impacts experienced were obviously schools closed, so young people weren't as accessible. The sports facilities were closed, which is where we were going to run the event, run the interventions. Lots of social distancing restrictions were in place. Multiple lockdowns, so every time we kept thinking we were coming back out, we'd get put back in again. There was a priority obviously put onto COVID-19 research, and a large number of staff were redeployed. So research activities were ultimately just sort of stopped at that stage. So if we go on to the next slide, Daksha. So what did we do to try to reduce down the delays? We knew obviously we couldn't do anything about the approval, so we just had to wait for that to start opening back up again, and it did slowly, it just took a lot longer. We received all of our approvals by August 2020, so we were ready to sort of get the site set up, and we got all of our site paperwork and everything in. So we actually opened to recruitment in October 2020. However, we had to drastically change what we were going to do. So initially, recruitment was going to be face-to-face in the clinic setting, where the young person and their parent would come and meet a researcher, they'd go through the information sheet, sign the consent forms, do the screening questionnaires, and then from that point, they were either eligible or not, and they would join the study. This obviously wasn't possible at this stage, both for obviously face-to-face contact, but also clinic space. It just wasn't possible. So we switched everything to remote recruitment. So everything was done via Zoom or Microsoft meetings. And we moved the consent to, rather than written signed consent, we introduced onto our database an electronic consent process. So luckily the database we use, RedCap, allows it's set up for that, so we could quickly change it. The screening measures were always able to be done online, because what we were going to do in the face-to-face was we were going to share our tablets with the young people. They were going to complete them online and then press submit. So all we had to do was adjust it so that we could send them the link. So they got sent the link, completed the screening measures, we could see them coming back in on the database. And the big change was we had to switch to online delivery of the intervention. If we wanted to start at that stage, we had to go online, because there was still no face-to-face. And it was a decision we made fairly early on, before the second and third lockdowns sort of happened. So we're pleased we did it. However, I'll come on to some of the challenges related to that later. So we were offering it as an online intervention. All training and the site initiation visits also went online, which wasn't too much of a challenge for that. But we also had to, because we changed to online intervention, and we had to change our protocols, the exercise protocols, because obviously they weren't able to do everything we wanted them to do necessarily in their homes. So we changed both the high intensity, wasn't too much of a change because they can largely be done on the spot. The low intensity had to change quite significantly, because we were going to do things like walking football, or things where there was going to be objects, and obviously we couldn't do that like this, so that had to change significantly. And the social activities, they had to change to an online function. So it was online quizzes rather than actual in-person quizzes. And so we opened to recruitment in October with these sort of like things in place. Next slide, Daksha. So for referrals, we've actually received over 280 referrals in total across the 3 sites, that is. And the sources, at the beginning, we were largely sort of focused on the mental health services, so going through CAMS and the single point of entry services, because that's where we thought we would get the majority of the young people. So a lot of letters were sent out and some people contacted us. And then we also set up some pick sites, so GP practices who would actually do a search and send of their own database. This was hugely delayed, and we actually only got this off the ground in June this year, because as you can imagine, GPs were hugely overwhelmed even after the lockdowns had finished, so they weren't in a position to take on board the sort of research, but they have done that now. So we recruited some GP practices. Our sports partnerships, once they opened back up, they could start advertising. I mean, they were putting it on their social media, but we could actually engage a bit more. We approach community-based organisations as well. So these are things that we contacted Girl Guiding and the Scouting and all of those type of youth activities, and local counselling services. So that there's a variety across all of the centres. Some of them are online services. A lot of them were just sort of like, you know, they got advertised for us on their social media. We had our own social media, so we're on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook now, to try to reach both parents and young people, because it is crucial that we do that. And we trialled a newspaper advertisement in recently, actually, in Norfolk, in the Norwich area, to see if that, you know, how many hits that might make. And most recently, schools. We've actually now moved away largely from those others, because we were struggling with the mental health services, because those that met the thresholds were actually in the services and then were being referred into us. We found they often didn't meet the eligibility criteria on the screening measures because they were too high risk. They often came with very complex disorders, so they would either be too high on the scale or they would propose sort of like present significant risk to themselves. So we didn't get that many, even though we had lots of referrals, a lot of them weren't eligible for this. So we needed to sort of take a step back and think, well, okay, what's before the services? Where can we get? No, we did have the challenge of trying to access those that don't meet the threshold and get accepted onto into the services, and we're still having that challenge, but we are trying to work with the CRN to try and set up ways to actually be able to send the information out to those young people. But schools is now our current big focus, and we've actually had quite a lot of success over that. Now that we started in May with engaging with schools, and we got a significant number of referrals. They then obviously went into school summer holidays, so we had a short period. We started back up again in September, and we've now moved to be able to offer face-to-face and be able to go into schools as well and meet with young people. So we've done an awful lot of assemblies, development days, PE delivery sessions and things like that over the last few weeks, trying to engage with schools, which they've really sort of like come on board this time round. And because it now has gone back to being a face-to-face intervention, because we're able to do that, it's much more acceptable. The challenges of this is the online recruitment process. Whilst we thought at the time that sounds like it would be quicker rather than getting someone to come in for an appointment and do it all, but actually there's a lot of going to and fro. We've tried to set up the meetings in the first place, getting the consent form, then you send them the link, getting that back. So it's actually been a very lengthy process. We have learned that, you know, it's taken sometimes up to 6 weeks to get through this process with some people, because you're constantly having to chase them. Parental influence on referrals is actually very significant in this age group. The referrals are largely driven by the parents. 90% of our referrals come from parents rather than the young person. Now, the young person has often been consulted, but they don't come forward themselves. So we're having to try to get the information out to the parents as well. And they often influence the young person's decision making, we notice, on whether they take part or not. So it's difficult because they're young, so you've got to get the parents' permission, but it's something we're trying to work with. Another big thing is randomisation. They have a preference for what group they'd like to go into, a lot of them. So some of them only want to do the high intensity exercise. Some of them want to do the social group. And if they have a very clear preference, it's difficult to explain to them that actually you've got to be randomised. In a lot of trials, that kind of randomisation, you have the preference, but it's often blinded what the intervention you get. So actually they don't know. In this, you can't blind it because they know what intervention they're in. So that has been a challenge. High levels of anxiety, it comes part and parcel of depression, so we are finding that, but also a bit of uncertainty, anxiety in the parents about when the sessions are starting, when they're going to happen. Time commitment from the parents' point of view, because they often have to take the young person to and fro, so that's been more of a parent issue than the young person. The high risk, I've talked about those with the fundamental health services. They had to be excluded because they were just too high on the risk sort of things, and the services being overwhelmed, not being able to support in the most recent. This last year, we've had a deterioration of the services as their services have become more overwhelmed. Next slide, please, Daksha. So recruitment, we're after 27 young people per site, so we need 27 for the Norfolk area, Norwich. We've currently got 5 out of 27 young people enrolled. This is largely this year because it just didn't take off last October. It was almost impossible. But the recruitment period does end this December. It's been extended twice because of COVID. However, I doubt we'll get an extension again, so we need to really push now, and we are getting more referrals coming in. We've got some proceeding through the process. The group sessions will start in January in 22, because even if we get a group now, we wouldn't start just before Christmas because we'd have to have a break. They'll be running at Carrow Park or the Nest because Norwich Football Club are our sports partnership, so they'll be delivering the interventions. And they'll be on Tuesdays and Thursdays between 5 and 8. So the first group will be at 5, second group at 6, and then at 7. And they're about an hour long each. Next one, Daksha. So how do young people get involved? We have a website, Ready Trial, just search for that. On the first page, there is the video that we just showed you. They can watch that. There's also a sign up button. This doesn't tie them into anything. It's just an expression of interest. This comes to the research team. We can forward it onto the relevant site to follow up. We also have an email address, and then we're on social media, so people can sort of like watch us and see how things are going then. Next slide, Daksha. And how can you get involved? How can you support the study? So by signposting, if you come across a young person, and even if they've got any other treatment going on, if you think this might help them, then they can do this. This is an add-on. This is not an either or. We'll just make a note that they've got other sort of therapies going on, but you can signpost it to young people who may be interested. Send the information out to young people that might be on your waiting list or list, just to see if any of them, while they're waiting, they want to take part. Follow us on social media, because it helps. I mean, not more followers we have, the more actually when we do post something, it goes out wider, so more people see that. So there's lots of different ways you can sort of help without really needing to do too much burden of it. Next slide, please, Daksha. And that's it for us. So thank you for listening. Do contact us if you want any further information, or if you want to refer directly to someone into us, then please contact us and we can put you in touch with the local team.
Great, thank you so much, Daksha and Claire. It's a really great presentation, really interesting and a fascinating study. I seem to have a bit of an echo on the line. Okay, seems better. Great. If you could please save up any questions until the end of the session, or put them in the chat, whichever you prefer. But now we'll move on.
Just to say that I've got meetings from 3 o'clock onwards, but you've got my email address, and I'm very happy to come back on email because I won't be able to stay. I've got meetings all afternoon, so apologies for that.
No problem. Perhaps then, if anyone had any urgent questions they wanted to ask now, please feel free. Okay, so we've got one. How does the process work with individuals with disabilities? Are they able to take part in Ready?
Yeah, so I mean, this is the feasibility stage at the moment. So whilst we can make allowances for most, we can make allowances for most. All of the activities would be able to be done. However, the heart rate sort of intensity level hasn't been measured in that group of people. But we have an awful lot of people, not necessarily with physical disabilities. We have a lot with learning difficulties. So yes, we review them on a case-by-case basis rather than saying yes we will or no we won't, but we will certainly consider everyone. And for the main trial, that is definitely something we will be looking at. With the feasibility study, because there's small numbers, we're doing it on a case-by-case basis, but we certainly have a number already enrolled who have either moderate to severe learning difficulties, and they're doing fine. So yeah, it can be adjusted.
Okay, lovely. Thanks, Claire. Any other questions anyone wants to ask now?
The only thing I would add to what Claire said was about, what can you do and how you can. So whilst we want information to go to young people, we're very keen that it's the parents as well that we want to reach. So if information can be shared both with young people and their parents, that would be an enormous support to the study. Thank you.
Excellent. Great. Thank you ever so much. If there are any further questions, then we'll make sure that they're forwarded on to you. But thank you for your time. It's really fascinating.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Okay, so next we have Dr. Ella Mickleburgh, who's going to talk to us about the LIMTLESS study. So Ella is a member of our department here at NSFT, started with us recently, and this is a relatively new study she's going to tell us about, and yeah, give us an introduction to what it's all about. So I'll hand over to Ella.
Thank you. Can you see my slides? Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me to talk today. It's a pleasure to introduce you to the LIMTLESS study. So as Brioney's mentioned, I'm Ella Mickleburgh and I'm the research associate on the project, and Dr. Simon Hammond is the chief investigator. And we've also got, we're lucky to have some fantastic co-applicants working on the project who offer a range of expertise, content and methodology expertise. So yeah. So the title of the project is actually Improving the Mental Health and Mental Health Support Available to Adolescents Looked After via Low Intensity Life Story Work, a Realist Review. So I'll just first of all begin by just looking at what I mean by life story work, if I can swap the slide. Don't seem to be able to. Oh, yeah, here we go. Okay, it just took a while. Okay, so what is life story work for young people with care experience? And I think when we think about life story work, there are a lot of differences in people's perspectives on what life story work actually is. But overall, life story work can be described as a way of helping children and young people with care experience create a record of their experiences and to understand their story. And there's more therapeutic, in-depth life story work that helps young people to process traumatic experiences they've had, and there's the more everyday collection of memories, so photos and memorabilia, and keeping these memories safe. And for young people with care experience, that's really important to secure those memories because they don't have straightforward journeys, and they can experience multiple different placement changes, and that can lead to the loss of memories and lead to them having gaps and not a full understanding of their journeys. So life story work is really useful in supporting their understanding of their journey into care and also beyond. Typically, life story work is undertaken by a social worker or a trained specialist worker, and it usually takes place over a specified number of sessions and time period. There is legislation in place that outlines that life story work should be carried out with children and young people in all social care placements. However, often it's carried out with younger children, and adolescents sometimes miss out on it. When good quality life story work is carried out, it is hugely valued by the young people themselves, carers and professionals. So some characteristics of what good quality life story work is it would be sensitive to a child or young person's needs, going at their pace, answering the questions that they want answers to, and also it being complete, so there's no gaps, and it's an accurate account. And it also has a coherent and meaningful narrative that the young person has been actively involved in the creation of. But practice is inconsistent and often quite poor. Either life story work isn't carried out at all, or there's gaps or errors in the life story work without there being any sort of coherent narrative behind it. And sometimes it's that the life story work is done, so maybe a book is produced and given to the child or the young person, and they've had no control or say in what goes into that work. Okay, don't know why, but I'm having trouble switching slides. I don't know. I might just exit and see if that helps. Oh, oh. Okay, now I've skipped forward too much. Sorry, everybody. The joys of Teams. Okay, so I've skipped forward a slide and I'm showing you all the, here we go. Okay, I'm here. Sorry about that. Okay, so the LIMTLESS study is a 16-month project and it's funded by the National Institute for Health Research. It's hosted by the Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust and it's led by the University of East Anglia. So intuitively, we know that Life Story works, but for who, when and how is still unclear. So I think Life Story work makes a lot of sense. So young people with care experience should have access to their personal histories. But because of coming into the care system, for some young people, this can lead to the loss of those memories and not being able to access them. I mean, there's lots of positive stories that I've heard about how Life Story work can have a positive impact on young people with care experience. But when you actually go to the literature, the evidence base is really lacking and there are surprisingly few studies in this area, and those that there are often quite of low quality and have really small sample sizes. So from such a weak evidence base, it's really difficult to know of any certainty who Life Story works for and when and how it should be delivered. And that lack of clarity means that there is no strong guidance on how Life Story work should be approached. So there's recommendations that it should be carried out, but there's no guidance on the best approach to take. And that means that there is a lot of inconsistencies in the quality of work being delivered. So the LIMTLESS project aims to carry out a particular type of literature review called a realist review. And that's a methodology that should increase our understanding of how, why, to what extent, for whom and in what circumstances Life Story work can be helpful to adolescents with care experience. Yay, I did it that time. So a realist review is a methodology that's often used to help us understand complex social interventions like Life Story work. And within a realist review, the aim is to combine our theoretical understanding about how, why and when an intervention works with the empirical evidence from the literature base, and with a focus on explaining the relationship between the context in which an intervention is applied, the mechanisms by which it works, and the outcomes that are produced. So we begin by looking widely at the evidence base and we develop what's called an initial program theory. And that details our underlying assumptions about an intervention and how it's expected to have an impact. So, and then we use that initial program theory to help focus our search strategy and the coding of relevant literature that we to test out the assumptions that we've got within that initial program theory. So as we go through the review of the literature, we will refine that initial program theory and further our search strategy, and this will lead to new literature being found and the rereading of literature from previous searches. And throughout this process, the program theory will continue to be refined and we'll continue to explore the assumptions within the theory until we are confident that of what the most important elements are and also the relationship between those elements. And also whether those elements are functioning as a context, a mechanism, or an outcome. So throughout the review process, it becomes progressively more focused. And to help us understand what the assumptions behind Life Story work are, we've created a care experience expert group as well as a content expert group. And they're there to offer their expertise at pivotal points during the project. So The care experience expert group is made up of representatives from the Care Leavers National Movement, and they are young adults who have care experience, and the content expert group are professionals who have different experiences of life story work due to their profession. So we've got foster carers in that group, social workers, clinical psychologists and academics in there. And we had our first expert groups last week, and those discussions are helping us to develop that initial programme theory. So the purpose of the project is to improve our understanding of how or when life story work should be undertaken, by whom and why it improves the mental health of adolescents with care experience. So because we're at such an early stage in the project, I don't have kind of any results I can share with you today, but what this is kind of our first initial ideas of what are of the most important elements that there are in life story work. So this is to feed into our development of our initial programme theory, along with our discussions with the expert groups we had last week. Sorry, so I'll just briefly talk through the model, but just also want to kind of raise that we developed this model before our expert group, so it's going to change quite significantly before we're happy with kind of the initial programme theory. So we're thinking that life story work, there needs to be a psychologically available other or others. So life story work isn't something that a young person would initiate themselves, but they need someone who's coordinating it for them, especially in the initial stages of life story work. So they need a caring adult, and that could be a foster carer or a social worker. The profession of that adult doesn't matter, but what's really important is the relationship they have with the young person, and that they have a therapeutic alliance between the two. So there has to be a level of trust and confidence within that relationship for the life story work to be successful. It also has to be the right time point. So the young person has to be ready for that particular aspect of life story work, and it also has to be the right time. The carer also has to be ready. So they have to have the training, the skills and the tools necessary to be able to support the delivery of that life story work. Young person driven. So the young person is controlling the pace and the nature of the work, and it's an area where the young person wants to explore and the young person is actively, sorry, I've got a bit of a tickle. I'm just gonna. Oh, sorry. I've been avoiding all the illness in my house, but finally I think I've succumbed. So yeah, and then we've got the process and the product. So both of these are equally important, and both help one another progress. So the process creates the product, but the product also helps to inform the process. So the product can be revisited, and by looking through it, but also revisited as in, now I want to explore further. So it's a continuous process that's constantly evolving. And through life story work, we should gain a coherent narrative, a strengthened sense of identity, an understanding of your history and care journey, and positive future expectations, as well as carers having an improved understanding and support, and be able to offer improved support to the young person. And then there's these kind of overarching arrows, and there's they're supposed to kind of represent the bidirectional nature of these elements. So actually, by having an improved understanding of your history and care journey, you're then ready to, the young person's then ready to explore another aspect of their life journey. And so that kind of process continues. And then I've got the kind of overall outcomes that we would hope for, that you would achieve from being delivered life story work. And here I've just got some of the key dates for the project. So we're at the moment, we're in the development of the initial programme theory phase. So that will be finished by December. And then we're able to really get into the literature searching and the coding and the refinement of that programme theory, which we'll then show to our expert groups again in May. And then we will go back to the evidence base and do more searching, and then we should have by September a programme theory that everybody agrees on, hopefully, and then we'll be able to disseminate the findings in between September and December 2022. And there is also hope that the programme theory that results from this realist review could be used to develop an intervention package of adolescent-focused low-intensity life story work, and the aim would be to apply for further funding to carry out a trial at that stage. So I just want to finish by saying a really big thank you to colleagues in NSFT for their support with the funding application and their input to the peer review process that they were involved with. It's really helped strengthen the project, and Simon was really keen that I thank you all for your support in that. So thank you very much for your help and support. And thank you for bearing with me and my croaky throat. It's typical that it happens right in the middle of a presentation. So yeah, thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much, Ella. It's really interesting to hear a little bit more about the initial programme theory. And yeah, hopefully we'll be able to hear a little bit about the final results in next year's seminar, perhaps.
Definitely, yes. I'd be happy to share that then. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to speak next, and then we'll finish with Kayte Rowe at the end. So my presentation is on the BEST study, which I think lots of you will be quite familiar with at this point. So it's a project that finished at the beginning of the year. I'll just share my slides. Okay. So BEST stands for Brief Education Supported Treatment, and it's a project funded by the NIHR again, and led by Dr. John Wilson, who is our research director at NSFT. So what was the project all about? So the project aimed to investigate the feasibility of a new approach to providing support to young people experiencing early symptoms of borderline personality disorder. And this new approach involved working in collaboration with schools and colleges, working alongside them to offer support to young people presenting with these sorts of difficulties. Why did we think it was important to intervene early for BPD? So I'm sure most of you will be familiar with the concept of BPD. So it's a disorder that often begins in adolescence, and the symptoms include unstable emotions, difficulties in relationships with other people, and often risky or impulsive behaviour, so things such as self-harm, quite common. And left sort of untreated, it can have really difficult consequences for young people throughout their lives. But importantly, not all adolescents with BPD symptoms early on do go on to meet diagnostic criteria for BPD later in life. So about 3% of adolescents will present with BPD symptoms. But by intervening early, there's evidence that we can reduce the number of those young people who will then develop BPD in adulthood. And there are some effective early interventions already out there for BPD. The trouble is that they are lengthy and expensive, and they rely on staff with a high level of training and expertise. So at the moment, very few young people experiencing these sorts of symptoms do get access to early support. Often they have to wait many years until difficulties have become very severe. They've reached a crisis point before they do then get access to that specialist support. So why do we want to involve schools and colleges? So obviously schools and colleges are where most young people spend a lot of their time. So we thought that by working together with schools and colleges, we would be able to, I guess, seize the opportunity to offer early support. Schools and colleges are often some of the first people to kind of start noticing some of the early symptoms, and are often really concerned about young people presenting with these sorts of difficulties. We were hearing reports that often pastoral staff were spending a lot of their time supporting young people who are experiencing difficulties that lined up with BPD. But they really struggle to know what to do for the best to provide evidence-based support. So we thought by working alongside staff within schools and colleges, we could offer those staff support and help increase access to early intervention. So the best approach involved a 6-session intervention, each session lasting around 1 hour. This is a lot briefer than existing treatments for adolescent BPD symptoms. So other treatments typically might last 6 to 12 months. So yeah, a great reduction on existing approaches. But the reason that we thought that it might work in the way that we were delivering it is that all of the sessions were jointly delivered both by a mental health practitioner, so someone from our services, but then also by someone within the school or college. And the idea of that is that by using that approach, we'd be upskilling those staff members so that they'd be able to provide ongoing support. So often the education practitioners from the school or college already had a relationship with the young person that they could use to support intervention delivery. But then after the intervention finished, they then had those tools and skills that they would be able to continue and reinforce the learning that had happened during the sessions. The best intervention was informed by existing evidence-based treatments, so specifically by mentalisation-based treatment, MBT, and dialectical behavioural therapy, DBT, but yeah, in a very brief distilled form. And the intervention was originally developed within our youth mental health services in Great Yarmouth by clinicians there, by Dr. Sarah Maxwell and Dr. Nikki Martin. But although it was successful in that context, they were only able to offer it to young people who reached the thresholds for secondary mental health services. So yeah, the idea was that through BEST we could offer this support much earlier. So the project had 2 stages. The first stage was an intervention refinement stage to bring the intervention that had originally been developed for use within secondary mental health services into a school context and make it appropriate for use within that context, and with the co-delivery model with school and college staff also being involved. So to enable us to do that intervention refinement, we did a couple of different things in parallel. So first of all, we did a review of the literature, of the existing research on barriers and facilitators to the implementation of these sorts of psychological interventions within a school or college setting. And then we also did a small-scale pilot just involving 3 institutions, 3 schools or colleges, and we did a process evaluation to see how that went. And based on that, we refined the intervention. And just to give you a sense of what the final intervention kind of looks like, and this is the BEST manual, just a few screenshots from it. So each session started with an agenda, then there was a series of activities that the practitioners worked through together with the young person. And then at the end, they would review the session and set something to practice during the week. And yeah, we worked hard in collaboration with young people to make sure that the materials were kind of accessible and colourful, was something they'd be happy to engage with. Stage 2 was a feasibility randomised control trial to test out, first of all, whether it was possible to implement the refined intervention and do that with fidelity, so do it how we intended to, but also to see whether it would be possible to test out the effectiveness of the intervention in a future full-scale RCT. This is just a bit of a schematic of the feasibility RCT. So we trained school and college staff alongside mental health practitioners in a training workshop to prepare them to deliver the intervention. And then we invited both schools and colleges and mental health services to refer in potentially eligible young people who were then screened. To be eligible, they had to be between the ages of 13 and 18. They had to be presenting with symptoms of BPD, including a history of self-harm. If they were eligible, then informed consent was taken and they were randomised either to a treatment as usual group where they would have access to standard care, or to a group where they received the 6-session best intervention and they were followed up. And alongside that, we did a process evaluation where we interviewed staff and young people who were involved. We recorded sessions and we checked the fidelity, and we did some I guess, more sort of ethnographic type stuff, looking at how things played out within the school. So there was a major spanner in the works of the study, in that this feasibility RCT took place during the 2019 to 2020 academic year. So COVID hit kind of right in the middle of the study. Obviously, at that point, schools and colleges closed to most young people. So as a result of that, the study did have to close early. So we recruited fewer young people than we were hoping. So we were hoping to recruit 60, and we only got to 32. However, we were encouraged by the trajectory of referrals in and the number of people who are being randomised. So we were optimistic that we would have got to our kind of minimum required participants if we had had the full recruitment window. Having said that, recruitment even before COVID definitely was a challenge. We had to work really hard to get recruits in. It's something we were really interested in is we got very few referrals directly from mental health services. So only 5 referrals from mental health services. Nearly all of the referrals, 56, came from schools or colleges directly. And yeah, there was a number of barriers. I think it's getting referrals directly from mental health services. One was that it's not routinely recorded which school or college that service users are attending, so it's quite difficult for clinicians to look through their caseload and see who might be at a school that was participating in the project. And often we were also told that young people on the caseload of secondary services had disengaged from school or college. So yeah, various kind of barriers we encountered. In terms of whether practitioners were able to deliver the intervention as planned and with good fidelity, they were. So we rated 31 of the recorded sessions for fidelity against our adherence checklist, and 29 of those 31 were rated as adherent. So it seemed like practitioners were able to deliver the intervention really well. And we had a really broad range of mental health practitioners involved in the study, from Band 4 practitioners, so assistant psychologists, CWPs, right through to kind of more experienced clinical team leaders at Band 7, CBT therapists. And it seemed like there was really good level of adherence to the intervention kind of across those different bandings, levels of experience, which was very encouraging. Although looking at change in symptoms wasn't the primary focus of this study because it was a feasibility study, we did have a look at whether our outcome measures did seem to be sensitive to any change to help inform what an appropriate outcome measure for a future study might be. In terms of borderline personality symptoms, encouragingly, both groups seemed to experience a reduction in symptoms, but there was no real difference in the level of that reduction. But if we looked at the difficulties in emotion regulation scale, Again, both experienced a reduction in their difficulties in emotion regulation, but there did seem to be a steeper reduction for the best group, which points to the fact that that might mean that that's a better measure to use, perhaps more sensitive to change, but very small numbers, so we do have to be cautious about this. Another thing we were really interested in was the acceptability of the intervention. So would young people and staff like it? Would they be happy to engage in it? And particularly for staff, would it be practical? Would it fit in with the kind of school context and school environment? And encouragingly, the acceptability seemed to be generally very high. Practitioners who delivered the intervention, both the school and college staff members and the mental health professionals, told us that they really enjoyed the experience of delivering the intervention. They found it very useful, and they particularly enjoyed kind of the learning from one another. They found that a valuable part of it. And they felt that the intervention had been of benefit to the young people who received it. And for the education practitioners, they talked about having used the skills that they picked up through delivering the intervention, both with people who were part of the intervention, but then also more broadly in their kind of day-to-day work. And that acceptability was largely mirrored in the perception of the young people. There was one young person who didn't feel that the intervention had benefited them, but all the other young people we interviewed said that they had found the intervention valuable and that it helped them to make some positive changes. So overall, it seems like the intervention was acceptable. Some of our kind of wider process evaluation work enabled us to start to think about some potential mechanisms of change. And we identified 3 kind of levels on which the intervention may be having an impact. So first of all, on the level of the individual participant, participants told us that they valued feeling heard, especially in a school context where sometimes they hadn't had that experience previously, they told us. They increased their kind of self-understanding of what they were experiencing, and they developed some better ability to kind of recognise their emotions and then to manage them, some improved coping skills. For the education practitioners, it increased their confidence in the ability to support young people experiencing these sorts of difficulties, and sort of provided them with a kind of enhanced, broader toolkit of strategies to try. We also had some indication of benefit for the wider school or college in terms of increased awareness of BPD and associated difficulties, and a new way of looking at behaviours that they might previously have seen as kind of acting out. They could now see through the lens of mentalisation, which was taught as part of the intervention. I've picked out a few quotes that illustrate some of the benefits on those different levels. I'll resist the temptation to read them out, so I'll just leave them up on the screen for a second for you to have a look at. The common thread in both of those quotes is, although perhaps difficulties haven't gone away, the young people said that they'd increased their ability to manage those difficult emotions they were experiencing, which is very encouraging. And participants also spoke about the value of the mentalisation skills that they were taught. I've realised I haven't explained that concept of mentalisation. I've mentioned it a couple of times. Basically, it's all about being able to recognise the behaviour of yourself or other people in terms of the mental states that might underlie that behaviour. So being curious about what someone might be thinking or feeling that leads them to behave in a particular way. So both of those quotes just illustrating young people's increased ability to mentalise and the kind of value they perceived in that new skill. And And for some young people, they spoke about these new skills having made a real difference in their life. So this young person speaks about having stopped self-harming, having more friends, better relationship with family and parents, and also getting on better at school with her schoolwork. So I've got to say this is probably one of the the most radical examples of positive change. But yeah, illustrative of a wider pattern of generally people feeling that it had made an impact on their life, which was really positive to hear. And then education practitioners also told us about their experience of co-delivery and how that had increased their confidence, enhanced their range of strategies to use. So yeah, more confidence in talking about emotions, picking up things that they could use with future work with young people. And yeah, sometimes just kind of relatively small skills. So the ability to be comfortable with stillness and silence, that were picked up through observing the mental health practitioners that they worked with. And generally, people thought that these benefits outweigh the logistical challenges of co-delivery, which were significant. It was very difficult to just coordinate for mental health practitioners to go into schools at set times. Yeah, logistically challenging on multiple fronts. But the feedback we got was that the different skill mix that the two practitioners brought made that logistical challenge worthwhile. And a final quote, just illustrating the wide impacts on the school or college potentially. So this is an educational practitioner talking about how they thought about behaviours of other students in a very different way, having participated in BEST. Okay. So just to finish off, I'm just going to talk a little bit about where we're going to bring the project next. So as I mentioned, this was a feasibility study, so focusing very much on whether we thought it'd be possible to do a future trial to test whether this approach might be effective. So we're now starting to think through how we can do that trial. The findings, I think, indicate to us that it would be worthwhile doing, but there are still lots of uncertainties, I think, on how we'd be able to do that in the best way. We're also now in a very different context to the one we were in when we initially developed the BEST feasibility project back in 2017, 2018, because of the new mental health support teams in schools. So there's now a whole new school-based mental health workforce, primarily made up of EMHPs, educational mental health practitioners, who are practitioners who are specifically trained to deliver brief psychological interventions within school or college settings. So in some ways, this really solves a lot of the problems for us, because lots of the logistical challenges were about people working in sort of CAM settings, having to travel into schools and colleges where they didn't have kind of existing links. So it was quite outside of their usual work. Whereas for the EMHPs working within schools and colleges already as a core part of their role, this really seems like it would fit well. So our plan is to apply for programme grant for applied research funding to do a further project to first of all establish the feasibility of integrating BEST into this new landscape of school-based mental health services, and to finalise the design within that new school or college setting, aligning with the mental health support teams. And then we hope to do a definitive trial of the effectiveness and cost effectiveness of the BEST intervention. And we're particularly interested in the implementation process, so taking this beyond Norfolk and Suffolk, across the country. How will it work to roll this out? So finally, just a thank you to the many people who are involved in the BEST project, so participants, school and college staff members, mental health practitioners, expert advisors. It was a really big team effort. So yeah, thank you ever so much for everyone who contributed. Okay. So final presentation today is from Kayte Rowe, who's our Deputy Research Manager and lead for the CHEYENNE initiative, which she's going to tell us a little bit more about.
Hi, thank you for that. I'm just going to feedback on my thing. I'm just going to make sure that you guys can see. Can you see the slides? Yeah, cool. Okay. Yeah, so I'm Kayte Rowe. I'm Deputy Manager of the research department here at NSFT. I'm an occupational therapist. It's my clinical background. I've been very fortunate in the past year to be working on a new initiative within the research department, which is called the CHEYENNE project, which is specifically looking at children and young people's research to support mental health needs. And that's about bringing together the development programme, which Brioney is leading on, the delivery side of things, which is delivering the sort of national and local NIHR sort of portfolio studies, such as Ready. We've heard from them this earlier today, but also kind of other areas which I'm going to sort of focus more on talking about today is things like the youth engagement side of things as well. So we've been running this about a year. And in terms of why do we need the CHEYENNE project is because we want to improve inclusivity and accessibility to research, that we know that there's a lot of young people out in our area that we're not making research open to. They don't know it's there, or for some reason we're just not accessing them. So really focusing on that inclusivity and accessibility. We also want to understand the needs and the motivations of our younger population and improve the recruitment and retention to the portfolio studies. I think, you know, from Brioney and from sort of Daksha earlier on from the Ready study, we know that the COVID has had a massive impact on our ability to recruit into studies. So CHEYENNE is about being able to really focus on how we can modify how we do things to keep up to date with whatever the changes, whatever the challenges that come our way. We're also wanting to improve links and working with not just our NHS partners, but also non-NHS partners, so that we get a really sort of multidisciplinary, collaborative approach to developing appropriate research throughout the region. And within that, which is, as I say, one of the bits I'm going to talk more about, is the youth engagement programme, and really enabling young people to have a voice in determining how we do what we do, and how we communicate what we do as well. And that includes actually making sure that the research priorities remain up to date and relevant. Things change very, very rapidly. We've done research priority projects before, but I think, you know, again, we've seen how quickly things can change over the past couple of years, and just making sure that we can make sure that we are getting our research absolutely right, meaningful and relevant. And I think one of the other things is about standing out and making a difference, is about showing NSFT Research to be a truly kind of holistic, collaborative partnership that is attractive to other organisations when they want to come and actually do some research, that, you know, we become a centre of excellence essentially. So we need to really develop a new way of working, and an innovative way of working. And if this model works, we will be looking at kind of moving the model out into our older people and our adult themes of research as well. So it's quite exciting, I have to say. Feel quite passionate about it. We're developing a 5-year strategy to make sure that we have very clear targets to evidence the success of CHEYENNE, and this 5-year strategy will fit very comfortably into the 5-year strategy, overarching strategy of the research department. So you can see from this slide that it's about involving stakeholders, the development side, the delivery, and the PPI, or youth engagement. That it's about building a sustainable and focused service that really is moving towards that co-production and is informed by the needs of the younger population and their families, so that we're putting them much more in an influential and driving seat around, and putting them in the expert seat around what the needs will be. It's about engaging a range of stakeholders from not just health and social care, but from our academic colleagues, social enterprise services, charities, things like that, and again, the young people and their families. And continuing to support the national and local research programmes, but again, really thinking on the equality and the diversity, which I'll talk a little bit more about how that's influenced one of our recent projects that we're just starting soon. And it's about providing a specialist team, not just a NSFT R&D team, but within that whole collaborative partnership, that we really share those skills that we all have in working with a broad range of young people with complex needs and in different situations, so that we become real specialists in what we do. Now, as I say, I was going to focus on sort of youth engagement really, because I think it's one of the areas that is one of the key important areas for me personally, but I think it's also one of the areas that we've needed to focus on, and that we're not showing that we're just sort of ticking boxes, that we are really embedding youth engagement in the core of everything we do. Now, it's a massive kind of, it is like cogwheels, it's always going round, and one thing impacts on the other. So in terms of service delivery, good youth engagement really does provide and ensure that we create cost-effective treatment options, that it's efficient in time and recovery, but also it's engaging. I think one of the things that's really important is that we are providing service interventions, treatment interventions that the young people are really wanting to use and engage. And it's studies like BEST that are really important. Ready again is not is it just, does the intervention work? Is it attractive to young people? Will it become treatment choices that they will really engage in? So youth engagement's a really important part of making sure that happens. Again, with research, it is about that meaningful research. It's a lot of money to do research, as we know. So, you know, we want to make sure that it's cost effective, that it is relevant to the population that we have. We, as we often say, we work in a very geographically unique area that brings its own unique population, and we need to make sure that our research is relevant to that population, and by doing that we're making it inclusive and accessible. But what about the benefits to the young people? Research in itself has shown that actually engaging young people in all aspects of research, right from the concept of ideas through to the funding applications, the delivery of research, the analysis, the writing up, and then the communication and the promotion of what we do, really does have holistic benefits in terms of providing structures, routines, practical skills, all of these sorts of things. So you've got a sense of belonging, you've got improved feelings of choice and agency. It helps develop their sense of identity around who they are, what they do. And young people are still do have quite a strong sense of altruism and are very clear and are able to make a lot of good choices around research. So, you know, it's about improving that, you know, sort of skill for them and that sense of who they are and autonomy and things like that. So it has a lot of kind of almost intrinsic and external benefits to engage young people. But it also has other benefits, not just for young people, but families. And it's been shown that to have a really strong youth engagement programme, it does impact on things like there is a shown decrease in self-harm behaviours, which not just behaviours such as cutting and overdosing, but also the use of alcohol and drugs. There has been seen an increased and sustained engagement in education, decreased antisocial and risk behaviours, behaviours that maybe are sort of put them at risk through sort of sexually inappropriate behaviours or you know, sort of criminal activities, all of those kind of things that again we can see in that younger population, and an overall improvement in their well-being and mental health. So whilst we get a lot of benefits from engaging young people, as I say, that holistic and that sort of approach actually does benefit them in so many ways, and it's really nice to be able to provide a service and develop a service with young people that hopefully will improve how they feel and their engagement generally. This is just a couple of things that I wanted to sort of show you about what we've already been doing. Is that we have, as you saw on the last slide, 2 young lads showing up some of the information booklets that we have devised, that we have used a lot of young people's involvement in, and some of the pictures here, they have been drawn by some of the young people that we have in our youth engagement plan. And I think sort of the middle one is talking about, you know, research is respecting people's choices, it's effective medicines and therapies, studying symptoms of illnesses, extensive investigation, adapting answers for vaccines, relieving symptoms, careful consideration of a study, healthcare service improvement. And I think it shows that actually young people really do understand what research is about and the importance of research. And so we're actually really wanting to draw on that that capability that they've got. I have got a YouTube video here, but I won't show that. What I will do is I will sort of at the end, I will pop it in the chat at the end, because I think it's useful to kind of, if you can copy and paste it and go and have a look. And what it is, it's the video that we have done, sort of Claire Muttimer has done with young people and put together about them talking about what they feel is research and what they feel the benefit of research. And again, it's just that move to really engaging young people in everything that we do in terms of the research that affects them. Just looking at the time, yeah. So in terms of a project that we are sort of starting, really, is a digital communities project. We'd secured some CRN funding, some clinical research network funding. We put in a bid for this, and we were very lucky to get that bid. And it's about focusing on engaging groups of young marginalised people in looking at how to design a best practice guide for developing new research. And that we're going to sort of like access them through our sort of Researching Together network. Our Research Together network is another kind of aspect of what we're doing, where we're actually approaching charitable and non-NHS organisations to talk about how we can develop working partnerships with them. And that doesn't just asking them to promote our research, but it's what can we do for them as well? What training can we provide? How can we support them to develop their own research and things like that? So very much a two-way process, but also recognising their expertise in a certain population that we can then enable greater access and greater inclusivity around what we're doing. So the project is aimed at recruitment strategies to reach young people in a way that works for them. They're not always the easiest of young people, I think, again. You know, Brioney was saying, and I know sort of from the Ready trial, that actually kind of recruitment can be quite difficult when you are trying to engage a certain group of people, either through education or through our usual you know, sort of clinical service routes. So what is the best way? Where can we get that information out? Where are they going to their information? What are the social media platforms that are the most likely to reach them? I'm still kind of like working with Facebook, and apparently that's so passé. So, you know, I've got no chance. And what is it important to be asked or measured for young people? So again, it's not making the assumptions that we know what's right for them and what is important for them. So this is where we're going to be talking about things like research priorities, but also what are the questions that they want to be asked. And how are young people wanting digital research to be delivered to them? One of the things that we know through certainly the Ready study earlier on is that young people are quite tech fatigued. Particularly with COVID, where they've had to go into homeschooling and all of things like that, that actually to then have to have kind of research or clinical interventions online through social platforms is actually quite exhausting, and they've lost the impetus and the motivation for that. And also that the social contact is really quite important to them. So it is about actually really letting them lead the way on telling us how to do that. And what are the key messages do young people want to give researchers about what they want from research? again, going back to Ella's presentation and to Brioney's presentation, it's very much about that they really benefit and really appreciate being heard and properly listened to. And there's no difference in research, you know, about really not just listening to them, but taking on board so that they can see that what they've told us is actually having an influence on the processes and the procedures and the developments that we make. And also what's really important is what not to do, what actually puts young people off participating in things. And we know things like being rigid around times, having high expectations, and certainly not making acknowledgement to the burdens and the responsibilities that they have around schooling, social context, is things that really do put them off. So we're going to be looking at some key groups where, as we talked about, being sort of marginalised groups. So we're looking at homeless, unstable housing, so young people that are in families at risk of being made homeless or are in unstable housing, those that are young carers, those that are part of the LGBTQ+ groups, refugee and forced migrants, and also ethnic minorities, specifically focusing on Afro-Caribbean groups. And we have links already with charities around those areas, and we're developing a kind of a questionnaire, a survey monkey, to go out to these groups to start developing that process and getting some of that information back. The initial process, which we will be doing between now and up towards sort of January, February, is going to be developing individual information sessions around mental health. So looking at mental health inequalities and outcomes, discussions, bringing in health service education and how to access the services, who to go to and how to get to them. Looking at what research is and the clinical research network involvement, so starting to bring in the concept of how research impacts on all of the delivery of interventions and clinical services, and then beginning to look at what is the research prioritisation. And then sort of February, March, because we only have up until the end of March to get this project done, we will be looking at designing the next generation of mental health care through through research, through actual workshops. So bringing young people in and really starting to get ideas down, and that is a true process of a co-production. And you know, it's going to be really exciting to see how this moves forward and really embeds itself in the core ethos of the CHEYENNE project. So yeah, just looking forward. It'd be interesting to come back maybe later on and talk more about how that went at some point. So that'd be quite good. So that's the our digital communities project. And just finally, we have a sort of a specific focused team within the R&D department. So I lead it. We have Brioney, we have a few other, Bonnie obviously is working on it as well, but John Wilson and a few of our other colleagues are specific to working on CHEYENNE. And one of the things I really wanted to do was get them to really think about why this was important. And I think it was really quite nice to see some of what they were talking about, which is saying that it's really around, you know, wanting to understand about providing more opportunities for young people and their families to be part of research and finding out what matters to them. So what is really important to them, and that actually it's about providing hope and giving meaning to very difficult experiences. You know, particularly those that become from disadvantaged situations that can maybe get more benefit from it, making it sort of creating opportunities to take part, not just in the delivery side, not just taking part in research, but taking part in all of those other youth engagement processes as well, and untapping potential. And I think that's the other thing, is about empowering young people to see that they do have potential and that they do have expertise to bring to what we do, and providing something unique for young people, and influencing the research programme. And I think again it's about recognising that younger people have unique needs, interests, concerns and culture, that we are the ones that need to adapt to them rather than them adapting to us. So that's it really. So that's just a very quick run through of CHEYENNE, and thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Kate. That was brilliant. Okay, so we've come to the end of the presentations. So we have some time now for questions and a general discussion. I know that quite a lot of people have had to step out for other commitments at this point. But yeah, it'd be great to have a kind of discussion amongst the people who are able to stay. I don't think there are any questions in the chat so far to be answered. So yeah, if people would be happy to come onto the microphone and ask a question, that would be great. Just put your hand up to let us know that you've got a question or a comment that you want to make, or if you'd prefer to write something in the chat, that's fine as well. Kate?
Yeah, it's me again. You won't shut me up now. No, I just wanted to go back to the Ready trial, because I have been supporting that study as well, and with Claire, and I think, you know, it's been actually, I don't know whether Claire's back, but it's a shame if not, but it actually has been a real privilege to work with the study team in Hertfordshire, because I think it's shown that actually, yeah, even through very difficult challenges, I think open and honest communication, a real solution focused attitude to those problems, and recognizing that in a feasibility process and stage of research, it is about ironing out all those challenges, has been really quite refreshing. And I think there's been some really interesting choices that we've made to try and manage those, and it's felt like a really positive, supportive process, and I think being done despite the challenges. I think it's actually been managed really, really well in a really supportive way. So it's not all bad news when you don't get things going the right way. It's an opportunity, I think, to, you know, really think outside the box and be creative. So I think it's about seeing things positively.
Yeah, that's a really nice message, actually, that there's so much learning sort of along the way as part of the process, isn't there? I was wondering, just thinking about Ready, but it might apply to other things as well. Have there been things that have been a bit counterintuitive along the way? So things that you thought, yeah, this is really going to work, but it hasn't, or things that you weren't expecting would work that did?
Yeah, I think what I've alluded to around digital fatigue, that we really have had some very, you know, and two elements around that. Digital fatigue is one thing, that they really are fed up with just being on a screen. And two, actually not having the right type of digital equipment. So you know, most of us work on our mobile phones, you know, so actually completing the outcome measures and things like that, you know, if you've got single screen or you're on a very small mobile phone, actually makes it really difficult, and it just loses momentum and people lose motivation. And yeah, the feasibility of then doing an exercise group on a small kind of iPhone or, you know, Samsung, I'm not product placing here, anything like that, yeah, it actually does put people off.
Yeah, I've had similar conversations actually with people. It's been interesting because I think the assumption is that digital ways of working will suit young people because they're digital natives, very used to working with technology. But yeah, I think the number of barriers has come as a surprise. I think especially not having private spaces to use digital technologies. So you might be happy to take a Zoom call, but if you haven't got somewhere that's private to do that, other than, you know, maybe your bedroom, it makes life difficult, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I think also sort of the risk management of, if somebody, you know, sort of not just the mental health management, but in terms of Ready, if there's a physical risk that they kind of hurt themselves and things like that, how are we going to manage that? What's our kind of, how can we sort of like meet our duty of care and things, you know, it's we can't go and assess the space that they're going to be doing the exercise in. Yeah, so there's been quite a few considerations, you know, and I think it does show that the digital project that we're going to be doing is really timely.
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah, for sure. Bonnie?
Yeah, just to add to that, really, because I think the really tricky thing with undertaking research in that area with the digital kind of conflict we kind of seem to be having is we don't know what the future holds when it comes to digital care. So we are we're sort of working with the people of today, with the digital technologies of today, but trying to plan for care in the future. And that there's sort of an inherent difficulty there, because when we're kind of, you know, if we're publishing or coming to a conclusion of, oh, well, this wasn't feasible because young people now don't, 5-10 years time, it might be a very, very different thing when software and platforms and technology has progressed to a point it is much more comfortable and acceptable. And I think it's an interesting thing. I don't think we should almost shy away. I don't think in a way some of our conclusions should be, oh, this won't work because of it. It's about, okay, so what is it we do need to make it work? And when we're thinking about, you know, telemedicine as per the old term for the future, and is that going to be the norm going forward? We don't know. And therefore I don't think we should kind of shy away from that, but just work out exactly what that problem is, in the hope that in the future, when we're coming with our intervention, that the kind of environment, I guess, for delivery is a much more kind of a comfortable place for that intervention to sit. And I think at the moment we are walking in the unknown, because it's quite a big, I mean, we've been all living in this sort of hybrid environment for 20 years now with computers. Healthcare has only just caught up with that because of the pandemic. And so this is all very, very new, and I think we kind of need to recognise that when we're talking
absolutely
about, actually we're quite a way behind in healthcare. So yeah, it's interesting.
And I do think, Bonnie, that that's one of the reasons why you know, the project that we're doing, the digital project, is going to be so important in you know, 5 years time is going to be so different. We're not talking decades ahead, we're talking a matter of years ahead. Where
we need to keep redoing it, and we have to kind of keep it as almost like a fundamental thing, so we can look at the changes which are happening, as it's an evolution, isn't it? It's a constant evolution, is digital life. And we need to kind of keep on top of that, I think. So I'm hoping this model, it'll be a model of practice rather than a singular project, which is really exciting. I'll shut up now, sorry.
No, that's really good point. Yeah, might be having research appointments in the metaverse in the future. New world. Tina?
Oops. Hello. I'm really excited by this project. Is this initial bit you're doing over the next few months just within Norfolk and Suffolk, or wider afield? I'm saying that because I've got very good connections with North Essex, with an organisation that would definitely be interested in putting forward young people for this. And by April next year, the integrated care systems will actually include North Essex. So yeah, I'm just wondering.
I'll let Bonnie answer that one. Is she there? I think at the moment we were just looking at.
I am sorry, I couldn't. I was like floundering around with my mouse trying to unmute. Sorry, it's so very professional. Yeah, at the moment the funding is purely for Norfolk and Suffolk, but until the end of March. But actually, I can't see, in terms of the greater concept of what we're trying to get out of this, I can't see why we couldn't take it further. So, you know, I think, I mean, we're just keen that young people turn up and are part of the conversation. So, and I don't care where people live. I don't want there to be a postcode lottery for this kind of work. And it's, yeah, exactly. So yeah, we could talk about that. I think that'd be really lovely, actually, to get other young people in. Yeah, brilliant.
So I'm not seeing any other hands going up or questions. So I think we might leave it there, if unless anyone wants to come in last minute.
I'm just going to put that thing in the chat.